What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 85 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about Superman. They saved Luthor's brain! Ooh-ah! This is a story from the early to mid-90s that basically shows us the process of how they saved Luthor's brain. Slight spoilers. If you'll remember, almost a week ago when I talked about Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, I talked about how Lex Luthor committed suicide and how that was seemingly the end of Lex Luthor's era as Superman's nemesis in the post-Crisis Superman books. Well, we all knew that Lex Luthor was not going to stay dead. The real question was going to be, how are they going to bring him back to life? Is it going to be a satisfying way of bringing him back into the Superman series, and is it going to be a worthwhile story? And after reading this book, I'm going to have to say, no, it's not very satisfying. I don't think there's very much good about this book. I think the best thing about it is probably the cover. I really love this cover. It reminds me of a 1950s horror movie. The contents of the book do not really reflect 1950s horror, but it definitely looks like that on the cover, and I think that's pretty cool. And that may be harsh to say that that's the best thing about this book, but unfortunately, this is just not very good. This book is really boring. For like the first 2/3 of this book, not a lot actually happens. Basically, after you get through the first couple of issues, which are from John Byrne's run on the series, which is a good several years before the rest of this book, where we basically get some issues kind of setting up Lex Luthor wearing the kryptonite ring and losing his hand. Once we get those issues, then we get the issue where Lex Luthor kills himself, which we had in Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, and then we get the emergence of Lex Luthor's long-lost son, who comes to reclaim the Luthor Empire. And for like the first 2/3 of this book, basically Perry, Lois, and Clark, nobody trusts Lex Luthor, or rather, everyone in Metropolis trusts this new guy, except for our main characters. None of them trust this new Lex Luthor because of who he's related to and who, you know, they've dealt with for the last several years of Superman comics. And so we get a whole lot of Perry, Lois, and Clark all digging around, trying to figure out if they can trust this new Lex Luthor. And the book is really trying to play with the audience. They're really trying to make you think that this new kid is going to be an ally and that we can trust him and that he's nothing like his dad. And then just when you think that you can trust this new guy, psych, just kidding, it's actually a clone, and he has the original Lex Luthor's brain and memories, and it's basically the same guy, just younger, stronger, and prettier. And once you get to that reveal, the book starts to speed along, but unfortunately that comes way too late in the book. And also, if you're reading this story in trade paperback format, then you already know the big reveal. So reading the first 2/3 of that book, you're kind of looking at your watch saying, okay, we already know that this guy is a clone. You don't have to treat it like a big reveal since you put those spoilers on the cover of the book. But we do get a little bit of action here. We get to see Lex Luthor Jr. Cement an alliance with the shape-shifting Matrix character, who by this point, she has transformed herself into Supergirl. And if you've read the Death of Superman books, which come very shortly after this, then you know that she was working with Lex Luthor. Well, we get to see how that takes place here. We get to see a little bit of a falling out between Superman and Supergirl. We get to see a story that's kind of reminiscent of the first time that Clark Kent met Lex Luthor in John Byrne's Man of Steel book, where Lois and Clark, they are on Lex Luthor's boat, and then an assassination attempt happens. It's very similar to when Lex hired those hired guns in Man of Steel, but here, Lex did not actually hire the assassin. So it's a little bit different. And then we get basically an issue that kind of flashes back and shows how Lex put all this stuff in motion. And unfortunately, it doesn't really make any sense at all. If you go back and read Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, where Lex Luthor kills himself, there is no indication at all that he has plans to be rescued by these scientists and tell them to take his brain out of his body and create a clone. There is absolutely no indication that any of that is actually going to happen. Lex is very much acting like this is the end and I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory if I have to go out at all. That was his attitude in Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite. And here we're being told that he knew he wasn't going to die and that he was just going to fake his death, and then he was going to have this clone created and he would have his brain put into this clone body. And this is very inconsistent with that death scene, which I thought it was a pretty good death scene, even though everyone knew that Lex was going to come back, but it would have been a lot better if Lex didn't know that these scientists were going to rescue his brain and put it in a clone body. If he actually thought that he was going to die, and then these guys came along and maybe they had an ulterior motive, and that's why they created this Lex Luthor clone. That would have been a lot better, but saying that Lex knew about it all along, that doesn't make any sense. And also, we find out that the woman who is being passed off as Lex Luthor Jr.'s mother, it turns out that she also knew that Lex Jr. was Lex in a younger body, and that doesn't make any sense because earlier in the book, she and one of Lex's confidants, they go to get the young Lex Luthor from Australia and bring him to Metropolis. So all three of the people in the room all know that this is the old Lex Luthor in a young Lex Luthor's body, but they're all acting like, okay, let's get you to Metropolis, boy. You have to go and reclaim your kingdom. None of them are acting like they actually know what's going on, even though all of them know what's going on, as we find out later in the book. This book is just not very well written, just from a logistics standpoint and also just from a basic plotting standpoint. I really wish that they had come up with another title for the story. I really like the cover. Like I said, it's my favorite part of this book, but if you want to treat the contents of this book as a surprise, if you want people to be like, oh wow, I can't believe it, they cloned Lex Luthor, that's really crazy, then you need to come up with a better title or a different title, and you need to come up with a different cover that doesn't completely ruin the surprise of what's going on in this book. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to say I don't recommend They Saved Luthor's Brain, which is a shame because I remember really enjoying this the first time I read it, but rereading it this time, I have to say it doesn't work very well as a consistent story. So those are my thoughts on this book. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.